Hi everybody and welcome to Cash Alternative Debate. My name is Rod Ambrissi and I'll be your host. We have a series of TV shows where we bring the toppest name in cryptocurrencies to talk about the most important subject. Before we start today's debate, make sure you click to subscribe and of course leave your comments. Once again, I hope you enjoy. Hi everybody and welcome to the Decentralized Debate at Cash Alternative. My name is Rod Ambrissi from Dash Brazil. Today here with me we have Ryan Taylor, CEO of Dash Core Group, and also Dr. Darren Tapp. He is an assistant research professor at ASU. Welcome everybody. I'm going to start with Ryan. If you can please give a 2 minutes introduction of what you do and your background, and also you, Darren, so for our new viewers to know what you guys exactly do.
Sure. So I'm the CEO of the Dash Core Group, which is the entity that is primarily responsible for the Dash protocol and the software that runs the network. We have around 35, 40 team members and based out of Scottsdale, Arizona. And been doing this for almost 3 years at this point, leading the team. And I got to admit, I'm a little jealous of the doctor title.
Dr. Darren
How
Tapp.
cool is that?
Yeah, no.
I feel so little next to doctor.
I don't know if you saw in another video, I said that I think you were ahead of me on understanding the economics of how Dash was working at your presentation at the open house. So anyway, I mean, titles only mean so much, right? So, I'm Darren Tapp. I earned a PhD at Purdue University. I'm assistant research professor at Arizona State University, working with the Blockchain Research Lab. There's two problems right now that are kind of relevant to Dash. I mean, maybe everything tangentially is relevant to Dash, but two major ones that have applications. Zero knowledge proofs that I'm not currently involved in, but we have two people working on that right now, and the economic problem, understanding the economic problem that Ryan brought up at the open house. That's what I am working on right now at ASU. I'm also with my own company, Tapp Math.
Tapmath.com, we can see it right there.
Yes. Originally it was Dr. Tapp's Mathematical Endeavors, and that became too big of a name. So now, just today, officially, legally, I'm doing business under Tapp Math.
All right, there we go. So recently, the main question came up regarding proof of work and proof of stake. So if you, Ryan, if you can please go ahead and just give us a little explanation how proof of stake works.
Well, there's several different flavors of proof of stake, but generally the way that proof of stake works is that access to an amount of one of these digital currencies basically entitles the holder to create blocks associated with the blockchain. And there's various mechanisms with which they do that, but the key resource for a block producer is the amount of coin that they have as opposed to the amount of processing power that they have. And so in essence, the idea behind proof of stake is that a person who controls a large share of the currency itself would also be very disincentivized from attacking said network. And so basically proof of stake is one of several different options for securing the network, and one that depends on a fair amount of distribution of the holdings in order to be effective.
Dr. Darren Tapp, can you please give us just a quick rundown regarding proof of work?
So proof of work is there's actually a long history of proof of work. It started as a mechanism to avoid spam in email, or at least that's what it was in the literature. I don't think it ever got applied that way, but the idea is that you have a computer solve a difficult problem, or do a computation that's difficult to reproduce, and so when that happens, you have some proof of work. And so the reason why you hear so many people talking about it now is when Satoshi Nakamoto came out with the idea of a blockchain and using that to solve the Byzantine generals problem. The paper suggests that or uses a proof of work mechanism to determine or elect the next entity that creates a block. And so that's one reason you hear so much talked about proof of work right now. But I think it goes back to the 70s. And currently, as far as I understand, all blockchains currently have some proof of work, maybe with a few exceptions. There are very few exceptions. But like we're looking at Peercoin as something that has proof of stake, but it still comes out with a proof of work block every once in a while. And we're also looking at other options for Dash too. So.
All right. So yeah, Ryan, in your Store of Value speech at the recent Dash Evolution Open House, you mentioned as one of the more aggressive suggestions to actually Dash move from proof of stake to proof of work to proof of stake. How would this take place, and how beneficial do you think this would be for the network?
Well, I'm not sure that I'm actually advocating for proof of stake. I think, to clarify, proof of stake is kind of the most extreme example of a reallocation in the way that our economics work. And I used it mainly to illustrate the point of kind of how much of an impact an allocation away from miners could have in theory. In reality, there are a number of issues with proof of stake. We have some form of proof of stake within our network with the masternode systems, and in particular when we implemented chain locks, which depend on stake in order to be secure. And so we already have some elements of it. We also have, of course, proof of work block production. And so I introduced it as kind of the most extreme case of a path that we could follow in order to illustrate the economic impact of that. Now, whether or not proof of stake mechanisms are sufficiently secure and battle tested to actually move to that is a separate question. So I know I didn't directly address the question, but I just wanted to clarify that what was in that presentation was meant to illustrate the range from where we are today to kind of the most extreme example possible.
And Dr. Tapp, why do you think that proof of work benefits Dash compared to proof of stake if we do this switch?
Well, it's like Ryan was saying, the proof of work is battle tested. We have a decade worth of data suggesting that a proof of work blockchain is secure, and we have lots of different blockchains where this is the case. It seems like the only problems that come up when we're using a proof of work is if your proof of work is too much like or the same as another blockchain. That has caused some problems in the ecosystem. But in Dash situation, it's firmly the leader of the X11 space, and so the proof of work has served Dash well in the past. And kind of when you're approaching these things, really, if it ain't broke, don't try to fix it. So in some sense, it's not broken. The security model is there, and it's great and it's secure, and we can let that keep happening. Now, what Ryan brought up in his open house presentation was that there are some undesirable qualities that I think Ryan convinced me that proof of work causes some undesirable properties. For example, when the price is low, then the miners need to sell everything, or generally need to sell almost everything they mine in order to recover their costs. the margins are very thin. So so that causes kind of an increase of supply on the market, not just an increase in supply that's kind of sequestered and held by users and used in the ecosystem. It's used right away to pay for electricity, and then when the price is high, the miners might actually keep their profits in the cryptocurrency, just sell enough to cover their marginal cost, and that seems to be what's happening. And then I think Ryan also pointed out that with the dual structure we have now with the masternodes and the mining, Dash kind of gets hit harder by this price instability that the mining encourages. There's been reports that when the price has been falling, like the price fell to 50 or something, some masternodes that were leveraged, there's just reports, I haven't verified this, but some masternodes that were leveraged by using Salt or some other service actually had to be liquidated in order to cover the collateral of the loan. And things like that, that's something that you would want to avoid when the price is down. You don't want to have kind of liquidation. So I believe Ryan was suggesting to look more as proof of stake to maybe kind of fill in a gap if the price starts to go low, then proof of stake could swoop in and help create demand and stabilize the price. Or at least try. We could at least try that, or try to understand if that would actually have some kind of stabilizing effect on the price.
Yeah, go ahead, Ryan.
Well, I think that whether we can move to proof of stake or not, I think I'm skeptical that we would be able to make that transition. But I do think that with chain locks in place and the high success rate that those have had, even during stress tests of the network, is indicating to me that some type of reallocation makes sense. It's difficult to argue from the position that, well, we've added chain locks, we should continue spending just as much as we always have on mining activities in order to adequately secure our network. Because of this added layer of security that chain locks provides, I would argue that a reallocation does make sense. And what a reallocation would do is make the network more efficient. It would make less of the new coins being created going towards an activity that requires their liquidation. Mining is by definition a competitive enterprise, and therefore margins will always be quite low in that segment of the ecosystem. If they were high, more people would simply mine until that advantage goes away or until that margin goes away. And so I think that this is as much an argument about efficiency and how much it makes sense for us to continue spending on mining, given the advantages that chain locks provide the network from an economic standpoint. And proof of work is kind of the state of the art if we could get there. But I'm not sure that the risks are worthwhile. If we can come up with a solution that mitigates the impact of proof of work, reduces the amount that we're spending on it, and preserves more of the value that is created through the mining process for other purposes, I think that can have a tremendously positive impact.
With the price of Dash just triple in the past few weeks, would this idea go away if the price of Dash keeps going up? Or that's something that we can still look into it while the price of Dash still keeps going up?
I would never postulate that the only source of price changes is the impact from proof of work mining. There are many, many different attributes that go into price. And, software delivery is one, adoption is one, press coverage is one. And so there's a lot of different things that go into the price. And I'd say in any of those scenarios, whether the price is going up or down, what we're discussing here is ways that we can improve Dash as a store of value. You can improve Dash as a store of value even if it's tripling every week. If there are improvements to be made, the question is, should we capture those? And so I don't view the last 3 weeks as any reason to change the discussion in any meaningful way. The fact of the matter is that on a percentage basis, we do have a relatively high inflation rate, no matter which way you measure it, compared to Litecoin or Bitcoin, especially after Bitcoin's halving event in May. And that is a disparity that we have the opportunity to close and make us even more competitive. So even if we're outperforming the rest of the market, I still feel like this is a conversation well worth having. As far as the price movement of the last 3 weeks, I've done a lot of work over the past month to better understand these economics. And part of that has come from some internal debates that we've been having within Dash Core Group. And some good questions have been raised to me that have forced me to go back and model things and really try to understand the economics even better. One of them is, I had this hypothesis that the ROI of running a masternode would lead to a change in investment in masternodes, and therefore a change in the circulating supply, or the supply that wasn't held up in masternodes, going forward. And there was a lot of anecdotal evidence of that in the presentation itself, but I hadn't actually statistically quantified that in any meaningful way. And so when challenged on that assumption, I went back and ran some models and determined that indeed there was a correlation. But correlation is not causation. And so I needed to formulate a test that would prove that one caused the other. And so I correlated the ROI at the end of a quarter versus what happens in terms of masternode investment the following quarter. And it ended up proving to be a predictive measure over a long period of time. And so I was able to prove that there was causation there, but it doesn't even stop there. I was challenged again. Well, yeah, the ROI was high in the past and it's come down. So naturally, there's investment in masternodes following each one of those periods. And so I ran some other tests that would account for that factor and determined that masternodes are a little more rational than I gave them credit for, or the market is more rational than I gave them credit for. They don't strictly look at the top line numbers. It appears like the actual return on running a masternode is improving. And those two numbers, as the block reward shrinks, are converging on each other. And it seems like they're converging on a lower ROI than is in place today. And so we can expect, I think, the number of masternodes to continue to, or the ROI demanded by masternodes to continue to drop, just not, to a greater extent than I was modeling. And so we've gone through many iterations on challenging questions and then attempting to quantify those from an economic standpoint, from a statistics standpoint, in order to hone the model. And I think that even a modest reallocation from mining to masternodes would really address a lot of this issue. I'll be sharing a lot of this data when we get it into a more consumable format. And we'll be hosting some AMAs on Reddit over the next couple of weeks to try to help share the information that we've been digesting internally, and try to put forward kind of what we think a solution looks like. But I don't think a transition to proof of stake is a step that's going to prove necessary, because of the findings that we've had over the last couple of months.
Is any other blockchain project that did the switch from proof of work to proof of stake that we
Well-
can base ourselves into? And
Well,
what was the results?
So I think for another project doing the switch from proof of work to proof of stake, it has been highly advertised that Ethereum intended to go from proof of work to proof of stake. They even built in a consensus consensus rule that would kind of force them to change over to a new system at some point, and they've had to basically extend their deadline more than once, and it's even gone as extreme as they had a client coded up, ready. They released it to the public. They were expecting people to run it, and then a hard fork was going to happen, and they would switch over to proof of stake, which I believe they call that protocol changing into Casper. And well, what happened in that situation is they actually found a vulnerability before it hard forked over, asked everybody to revert back to an older version, and they're still using proof of work. So if you think that proof of stake is some easy task to just come up with and do, I don't think there's any evidence that that's the case. I think that the proof of stake problem, if it was easy, the Ethereum developers, which I would postulate that they're very competent and know a lot and very experienced, and I would expect if anybody could do it, the Ethereum developers could do it, and they haven't done it. And so,
and this is the primary argument, I would say, not to follow proof of stake route at this point. There's no reason why we have to be first. I think that having another project take on that risk and prove the concept out would be a preferable one for us and for our users, especially if we have the option of something less disruptive. And so personally, I think that the risks would not be worthwhile. I do think that Chainlocks provides us with a distinct advantage and would probably make it less risky for us than many other protocols. But like I said, I don't think it's necessary for us to be the first to test these waters, and it is not trivial. This would be a monumental task. When we can get, I think, most of the benefit with relatively minor changes, such as reallocation and some other minor changes.
If the network decides, for example, to go ahead and do this switch, how long this would take approximately?
Well, I think it's anyone's guess. I think Casper is a great example of good intentions where, anything that you're changing in a significant way in decentralized networks has proven time and time again to be very, very difficult and time consuming to get right. And Casper has dragged on now for a couple of years, and a lot of people are saying it's going to be a couple more. And so this would be the major effort for Dash for the next couple of years if we were to switch to proof of stake. And so I think that there are more important things for us to work on. I think there are some quick wins that we can put in place using proof of work as it stands, and probably is the more practical path forward.
And I think that a hybrid solution that still uses proof of work but perhaps has a reallocation for, as Ryan suggested, I think it would take about good 3 or 6 months to kind of understand where the parameters should be set, or at least have an idea of why to set them at certain values. And then I think it may take like a year of coding to because it's a hard fork. It's not something you would want to roll out instantaneously. It's not like raising the block size that they've done before. It's a new thing. So you might want to budget about a year of coding and testing.
And for the end user who couldn't care less about proof of stake or proof of work, what is the main impact? Is this something that the network will have to announce, please do not use Dash for 24 hours because we have to flip the switch and restart the system here? Do they have to update their wallets? What will be the impact?
I think it'd be minimal to users. The main thing is setting the difficulty right. If you lower the allocation to proof of work, what I would suggest for security reasons is to change the algorithm. Just use some hash function. You don't have to use the chained hash function that they use now. But just to kind of make the inventory of the X11 ASICs that are out there not assets that could attack the network. So you change the algorithm and then set the difficulty right off. The blocks could come out slow, but if you're willing to let the blocks come out a little faster, you could start with the difficulty a little bit lower than it should be, and it can organically get to the level it needs to be. So I really think that such a switch over to just a general user could be quite minimal, but it would be about the same disruption as the hard fork. So
I do think that there are some differences in the ways that blocks are produced that users may notice. Now, we of course would put out wallets that would be like mobile wallets that would be compatible with the network or interfaced through our new API, decentralized API or something of the sort. And so I can guarantee that our own wallets would work. But one of the issues with proof of stake that a lot of people don't know about is SPV clients, which are the light clients that most people run on their computers or on their mobile devices in particular. They don't function the same way. The Merkle trees and other cryptographic methods that they use to keep those clients light don't work the same way. And so a lot of these third-party wallets, if they're not informed and don't take appropriate steps within the timelines that we would announce to make such a shift, those users might be affected in terms of having the ability to access and use their funds within those legacy wallets. And so it's really difficult for us to control third-party wallets and ensure that they take the appropriate steps. And so there would be some element of putting certain users, it wouldn't put their funds at risk, but it would put the ability to transact on the network without, in their existing wallets at risk, at least for a period of time. And so there could be some minor disruption, particularly for people using third-party wallets. So it's not completely a completely clean switchover for users in all cases. I think it's that's another component that is kind of a relatively minor risk, but one that we would consider in any final decision.
And what's the main advantage today for Dash to be running X11 for proof of work?
Right now, it's established in the space. There's ASICs already developed for it. I think if we're not making a drastic change of the allocation or something like that, we're keeping the inflation schedule the same. There's certainly, I don't think there's any reason to change it. But if there was a drastic it was a change, like a reduction of the reward that's allocated to mining, I would be in favor of algorithm change.
I think the main advantage to being on X11 is that we're dominant in it, right. And that gives us flexibility to make changes to the allocation without introducing incremental risk that, or at least a great deal of incremental risk that, we could easily be 51% attacked. Chain locks are not perfect. They don't lock 100% of the time. Part of that is by design. We need the supermajority of the network to agree on the correct chain tip in order to lock it. And if two chain tips are published at the same exact moment, that may not be possible. The network may see roughly half and half as the valid chain tip. And so we do have to fall back on proof of work from time to time in a more traditional sense. And so it's important for us during those times to be the dominant chain of our algorithm. Now, the great part about X11 is if you look, survey the industry, we're the dominant chain by a couple orders of magnitude. And even if you add together all the other X11 coins out there, we're still an order of magnitude larger than the sum of all of them. And so it gives us a great deal of flexibility to be able to say, hey, you know what, with chain locks, we don't need to be spending as much on hash rate in order to be secure. We can spend a little bit less and be just as secure as we were before. And so I think we have the ability to do a reallocation in a very safe way. Now, if we were Bitcoin Cash, in which case we're not the dominant chain for our algorithm, that puts us at risk, and it makes it much harder to justify making an allocation change like that. And so being the dominant chain for X11, that's what gives us that flexibility to be able to do it in a safe manner.
How Dash can become a hybrid, which it already is, but also adding proof of stake, proof of work, master nodes, and chain lock. Is this visible, or is just adding more to complicate the equation?
I think it's feasible. Should I take this, Ryan?
Sure.
Okay, so
I'll have my own opinion.
Yeah, sure. We don't have to agree. We're still hashing it out now, and clearly there's been debate about the current thing before it's released. Anyway, so I think it's possible to have kind of proof of stake play a role. The question is how would it play a role? And for security considerations, I'm considering kind of situations where every block still has some proof of work behind it, but there are other. Maybe Ryan's going to tell you about a different, perhaps like a Peercorn inspired proof of stake allocation. But the way I'm thinking about it is that you have your master nodes, and there's each master node has 1,000 Dash that are tied up. You could call this 1,000 sequestered. It's like put away, and it's not circulating. And then, and now with the changes over 13 and version 13.14, the master nodes are on chain. So we have a very hard consensus about how many master nodes there are, at least how many 1,000 the Dash are put away for use on master nodes. And so since we have a hard consensus on that, it's possible that you could use proof of stake to kind of fill in the gap. Like if your number of master nodes decreases, you could have kind of the reward for staking increase. And the intention for that is to have basically the same amount of Dash sequestered as time goes by. So that would kind of apply some stabilizing force to it. So I think that's totally possible today, but the go-getter is that it still would not eliminate proof of work. So I can see still having proof of work with perhaps a severe reduction in the reward, and just like today, just have a very small reward for mining, and then the rest of it could be available for staking. But kind of in the early days of Dash, the reward was adjusting based on how much mining was there. We could have the same thing for staking. The reward could adjust. I would not want it to go over what's currently allocated for inflation or monetary inflation or dilution of Dash users. But I think you could go up to that limit and encourage the same amount to be sequestered and taken out of circulation. So that would apply some stabilizing.
Ryan.
Yeah, I think that we've batted around the idea of a hybrid. The rationale for a hybrid is, look, you get some of the advantages of proof of stake, which is basically ensuring that the inflation is going towards your users, and therefore they're being diluted less. It makes Dash more attractive as a place to store funds, because you're not being diluted to the same effect as you otherwise would. But there's a real problem with proof of stake that a lot of people don't really understand, and that's that with proof of work, I can't work on multiple chain tips at once. I can only, place my compute resources towards one of those chain tips. And so I have to choose. I have to choose the one that I think is most likely to be chosen as the chain tip. And so I'm heavily incentivized as a miner to put my limited resources towards one thing. With proof of stake, they have this, there's a term for it called the nothing at stake problem. And because I don't have to choose, I can actually put my coins to work towards multiple chain tips at once with a trivial amount of computing power available to me. I can now have my cake and eat it too. I don't have to pick a chain. I can pick all the chains, and I can try to, secure the next block on any of the chain tips. And that fundamentally makes the blockchain itself less secure. Because at any time you could, in theory, have a deep chain reorganization from someone that holds a large number of the coins. A lot of coins have attempted to solve this problem by saying, like Next said, you can't have a chain reorg deeper than 720 blocks or something like that. And but that just creates yet another problem about agreeing on what the correct block 720 ago was. And so, I think that there's been various attempts at trying to solve this problem, and no one's really cracked that nut as far as I know. Even chain locks would not be a perfect solution to this, because they can and do fail from time to time. Now, whether they would fail multiple times in a row, perhaps during a stress test or something to that effect, I think the probability starts to become a lot less, but this fundamental problem remains. And so one of the solutions that people have put forward is hybrids, where some of the blocks are produced proof of work and some are produced proof of stake. You do get the advantages then of both, but you also inherit the disadvantages of both. And implementing such a blockchain also is more complex than either of the two solutions. And so I think hybrids are interesting. I think that they introduce yet another option in the arsenal to be able to try to utilize proof of stake as an option. But it's unclear how that all of the complexity that you're introducing into the system is offset by enough benefit from the two working together to make this the clear winner. And so I think at this point, I'm unconvinced. I'm unconvinced of proof of stake, and I'm unconvinced of hybrids. I think that there is more work to be done to kind of answer some of these outstanding questions. Do I want Dash to spend the next 2 years being the one in the industry to answer them? Probably not, because I don't think it would bestow our users with enough of an advantage compared to some of the other things that we could be working on in terms of user experience to make it worth our while. I think that sticking with proof of stake or proof of work is probably the way to go. Doing something simple like a reallocation, and basically watching some of these other projects that are doing the true experimentation with things like Casper that we can then leverage at some point in the future. Yeah. We don't have a burning problem the way that I think Ethereum does to solve a lot of different things at once. They have to solve scalability. They have to solve their inflation rate. among other things. And I think that watching their project is probably the way to go. We have something that works really, really well. I do think that the current inflation rate is a little too high. There are things we can do to tweak that a little bit and manage it for a softer landing than we've had. And I think that's the more prudent path, to be honest.
Well, I think I'm actually very proud to be part of the Dash community and see that the Dash community the past 2 years during the crypto winter didn't drop the ball at all and came up with several innovations, integrations, adaptations, and growth, where comparing to other projects, which I'm not going to mention, are just literally dead in the water with absolutely no innovation. And here we are discussing something that, can be a topic for the next 2 years. But I'd like to thank both of you here for being present today, everybody. We had Dr. Darren Tapp from tappmath.com. He's the assistant research professor at ASU with the Blockchain Research Lab, and Ryan Taylor, CEO of Dash Core Group. Once again, everybody, thank you very much. And I'm going to ask everybody to leave your comments on the description below so we can start a conversation. I'll see you next time.